This is your ultimate stop for everything sports. The Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast. Should I say more? From the NFL, MLB, the NBA to MMA, it's all in here. The Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast. Listen now.
Hello, and welcome back to the GSMC Sports Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I am your host, Alex Masfer. Thank you so much for tuning in to today's episode. Before I start talking anything sports, I want to remind you all to subscribe to the podcast on whatever social media, whatever website or application you are listening to this on, whatever device. Make sure you subscribe to the podcast so you always get those alerts on your phone or on your computer, or however you may be listening. And again, you always get those alerts and notifications, and you never miss an episode, and you'll be one of the first people to listen to a new episode when we release one here at the GSMC Sports Podcast. Also, make sure to leave us a 5-star review in the comments. We would really appreciate that as well. That would be a huge help, and we would really appreciate it. So again, leave us a 5-star review on whatever app or website you are listening to this episode on. Also, make sure to follow us on all social media platforms, Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. We would love to interact with you guys more on there as well. We can talk about the show, we can talk about sports, we can talk about anything. So again, if you would follow us on the GSMC Sports Podcast Network and the GSMC Sports Podcast on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram, again, we would love to interact with you guys on there as well. I hope wherever you are and however you may be listening that you and your family are happy and healthy during these trying times in the world. Again, I hope you and your family are happy and healthy. We have a fantastic show for you guys today. A little bit later on in the episode, we'll be talking about 2 NBA teams that fired their head coach. What is the future of the Chicago Bulls and the New Orleans Pelicans? We will get into both of those as well. Towards the end of the episode, I'll be talking about a very interesting Brett Favre quote about the Aaron Rodgers situation, and we'll do a little bit of a deep dive on where could Aaron Rodgers potentially go, because all roads are pointing to Aaron Rodgers potentially not being the Green Bay Packers quarterback after this season. I've talked about it before. I want to talk about it again. List a couple teams that Aaron Rodgers might be able to go to next offseason. That could be really intriguing situations. And finally, we're going to be breaking down another NFL team schedule. I'm not going to reveal who it is, but at the end of the episode, we'll be breaking down another NFL team. I've done a ton of teams like this already. I love doing a big, breakdown on their schedule and what record they're going to get and everything like that. So make sure you stick around for the end of the episode. We're going to be breaking down another extremely interesting NFL team schedule. You're not going to want to miss that. But we're going to start off with what has happened today in the NBA world. It is official. The Portland Trailblazers will be the 8th seed going against the Los Angeles Lakers. First matchup is on Tuesday. Now, I want to really do a deep dive on this series because I think it might be the most interesting first-round playoff series in the entire playoffs. When I'm looking at the standings here, there's a lot of great first-round matchups. Again, Clippers-Mavericks is really interesting to me as well. Nuggets-Jazz is an interesting series. The only one that I can see that's maybe as interesting or as action-packed as Dame versus LeBron is maybe Rockets-Thunder. Russell Westbrook going against his former team, as well as Chris Paul going against his former team. In the East, there's a lot of snooze fest series. I mean, Bucks, Magic, that's going to be a sweep. Raptors, Nets, going to be a sweep. Celtics and Sixers would be interesting if Ben Simmons was playing, but again, I think that's a 4 or 5 game. The most interesting first round series for me coming out of the East is definitely the Pacers Heat series, but then again, I don't think that's going to be very close either. So in the Western Conference, there's a lot of interesting playoff series, but no doubt in anybody's mind, I think Damian Lillard, CJ McCollum, Yusuf Nurkic, the entire Portland Trailblazers squad going against the Los Angeles Lakers. We're really going to see the Lakers attempt to really turn it back on here. And again, this will be LeBron James' first time in the playoffs in almost 2 years. Again, he missed it last year. He obviously made it the year before with the Cleveland Cavaliers. So it's been a long time since we've seen playoff LeBron James. As well as Anthony Davis, we'll be finally seeing him back in the playoffs. I believe it's the first time we've seen Anthony Davis in the playoffs since he swept the Portland Trailblazers. If you remember a couple years ago with him and DeMarcus Cousins were both healthy and both on that Pelicans squad. Now, I want to do a deep dive on this series because, again, I think this is the most interesting series, and I think a lot of people are mistaking thinking that this series is going to be a 5-game series. Now, let's start off with the game played today. The Portland Trailblazers beat the Memphis Grizzlies in the play-in game. So if you remember, in order for the play-in game to happen, you had to be within 4 games of the 9th seed, had to be within 4 games of the 8th seed, and then there would be a play-in round. Memphis started off as the 8th seed going into the bubble. They fell all the way down to the 9th seed. Portland, I believe, went from the 10th to the 8th. Also, shout out the Phoenix Suns, who went 8-0 in the bubble, but they didn't actually get an opportunity to make the playoffs. That'll be something I'll talk about in a minute. But again, the Portland Trailblazers beat the Memphis Grizzlies 126-122. If they had lost today, they would have played again tomorrow. Again, Memphis would have had to beat Portland twice in order to secure the 8th seed. And again, Portland just had to beat Memphis once, which is what they did today. Now, this is the interesting part about what happened with Portland today. While Damian Lillard had a phenomenal game, and I talked about him at length in my last episode, and again, I think Damian Lillard is maybe the most underrated or even most underappreciated athlete in all of sports right now, man. What he does in the clutch moments, what he does for his small market club is something that not a lot of athletes can do. Again, he's having the effect in Portland right now of completely carrying them to the best stretches they've ever had in their career, similar to one that LeBron had the impact on the Cavaliers. Now, obviously, LeBron is better than Damian Lillard, and those Cavalier teams are a lot better, or at least some of them are, than these Portland teams. But you have to take into effect of what Damian Lillard has done for this team. He has absolutely changed the culture. He's changed the franchise. He's changed the fan base. He's changed the records. Obviously, he owns pretty much almost, or he will at least by the end of his Trailblazer career own all the records, and he's super loyal. And again, I talked about Damian Lillard at length in my last episode, how good he was and how his numbers are comparable to Allen Iverson, and they're better than guys like some of his stats are better than Steph Curry, Magic Johnson, Kyrie Irving, some of these other guys as well. And it is very interesting to think about how powerful Damian Lillard has been for Portland. But today it wasn't all Damian Lillard, and that's why I think this series is going to be a lot closer than people think. Because this isn't just Damian Lillard and a bunch of scrubs on the Portland Trailblazers. Today, Carmelo Anthony had 21 points. Jusuf Nurkic had 22 points and 21 rebounds. Damian Lillard obviously had his 31 and 10. CJ McCollum had 29 points. I'm pretty sure he had 14 points in the fourth quarter alone. Gary Trent Jr. didn't get the ball a lot. He shot 8 points. He only had 8 points tonight, but those numbers usually go up. Again, they ran a really short rotation. Only a couple, Hezonja, Whiteside, and Mario Hezonja didn't get a lot of minutes. Hassan with only 14. Gabriel with 9 minutes. Hezonja was 7. But really, they played the hell out of their starting lineup today. Carmelo Anthony had 38 minutes. Jusuf Nurkic had 41 minutes. Damian Lillard 45, and CJ McCollum 44. And Gary Trent played 35 minutes as well. But again, if the Portland Trailblazers really want to make this a series or potentially even win, the series, this is where it would take into effect here, is if it's more than Damian Lillard. And by the way, the Grizzlies were no slouch in this game either. This was an important game. Again, Kyle Anderson had 10 points for the Grizzlies. Valanciunas had 22 and 17. Dylan Brooks had 20. Brandon Clark had 20. And John Moran had, I think, the best game of his life and the most important game of his life with 35 points, 4 rebounds, and 8 assists. Kid was an absolute monster. But again, just not enough to overpower Damian Lillard and CJ McCollum, who combined for 60 points. Jusuf Nurkic adding another 21 to that. So those 3 guys alone combined for 80 points. Now, they don't have to do that every single night against the Los Angeles Lakers, but they're going to have to do something similar to that over a course of a series in order to have a legitimate chance. Now, if I'm reading the Vegas betting odds correctly, a lot of people expect this to be 5 or 6 games. I think it'll be a lot closer than that. I believe the Portland Trailblazers and Los Angeles Lakers series, at a minimum, will be going 6 games, and I would predict that it would actually go to 7 games. Now, there's a couple of reasons for that. One, these teams are very mismatchy against each other. There's really no good matchup for either side here when it comes to a defensive point of view. What I mean by that is that these games are going to have a lot of lack of defense, really high-scoring series, in my opinion. Again, both of these teams' weaknesses on the defensive end are kind of the other team's offensive strengths, right? So let's talk about what the Portland to the Lakers matchup first and the Lakers to the Portland matchup. Portland's strength is obviously perimeter shooting and perimeter players on the offense, right? Damian Lillard, CJ McCollum, and I would throw Gary Trent Jr. in there as well. absolutely outstanding three-point shooters all over the floor. Carmelo as well is a great perimeter player. Yusuf Nurkic is more of an inside guy, but 4 out of their starting 5 guys are absolute ballers and absolute shooters. Carmelo's the one who hit the dagger today against Memphis to really seal the win. Again, all these guys are shooting 40+% from 3. One of the best three-point shooting teams in the entire league is the Portland Trailblazers. Now, what is the Los Angeles Lakers' biggest weakness, right? I've talked about this again and again and again. The biggest weakness for the Los Angeles Lakers is their perimeter defense. It is their ability to not defend the three-point shot. It is their ability that allows their point of attack defense, really, which is the point of attack defense is the guy who comes up with the ball attacking, things like that. That's what the Lakers struggle with because, again, they do not have a good defensive guard. Now, they had 2 of them. They had 2 of them coming into the bubble or, a week before the bubble, Avery Bradley and Rajon Rondo. And then, obviously, Avery Bradley, due to family reasons, of course, completely acceptable answer, decided not to participate in the bubble. And Rajon Rondo had a fractured part of his hand, which it's unclear when he would be able to come back. I think I've seen some articles and some rumors that Rajon Rondo could maybe come back at the Western Conference Finals at the earliest, but nonetheless, he will not be ready for Game 1 against the Portland Trailblazers on Tuesday. So again, you have guys like Quinn Cook, more likely Alex Caruso, more likely KCP, Dion Waiters, maybe a little bit of J.R. Smith guarding Damian Lillard, CJ McCollum, and Gary Trent Jr. Now, I would trust a matchup maybe against Gary Trent Jr., but against CJ McCollum, who had an incredible game today, he had 29 and 14 in the fourth quarter. And of course, Damian Lillard already know that I think he's going to average at least 30 for the series. This is where the Lakers could prove to be into some trouble because, again, I think the Lakers overall are a good defensive team. I think they're maybe the best paint defense team in the entire NBA. When you look at it from a standpoint of, JaVale McGee is a rock-solid player. I know people make fun of JaVale McGee as sort of like a meme player or as a joke almost. Again, he's been on Shaqtin' the Fool a lot, so I totally get it. But, he is a solid rim-running center. He can block shots, he can get rebounds, and he's a pretty athletic guy as well. You already know what Anthony Davis brings on the defensive end of the floor when it comes to the paint. Incredible player when it comes to blocking shots, contesting things from big men, big, physical, strong guy. And LeBron James, when he wants to, which I think will happen when he turns it on in the playoffs, he will be one of the best defensive players in the league. But again, is LeBron James going to go all the way out there and guard Damian Lillard or CJ McCollum? That just seems like a little bit of a speed mismatch for me, and I really do believe the Portland Trailblazers could exploit that poor defensive guard play. And now what some Laker fans will see is, there's going to be a lot of stretches on the floor when CJ McCollum and Dame Lillard are on the floor. That's just not true. I would be shocked if at any point during this series, as long as it wasn't a blowout game, right? So at even any of the games. So I think that this series is going to go 7 games. That's just how I view it. I really do believe that Portland is a tougher team than people think, and I'll continue to explain that. But when you really look at it, right, there's not going to be, again, I would be really surprised if there's even more than 2 or 3 minutes max, probably 0 minutes, honestly, in the entire series where at least one of CJ McCollum or Dame Lillard will not be on the floor. And again, these guys have been playing big minutes all bubble. Again, I'll read the minutes to you again for what they played tonight against the Memphis Grizzlies. Carmelo Anthony played 38 minutes. Yusuf Nurkic played 41 minutes. Damian Lillard played 45 minutes. CJ McCollum played 44 minutes. Gary Trent Jr. played 35. So again, Portland is not afraid to not go deep into their bench and just continue to ride their starters, specifically in a series when no one's really giving them a legitimate shot, except maybe Skip Bayless. Portland has nothing to lose here. Portland has successfully completed their mission in the bubble, in my opinion, which was, hey, get to the playoffs. Because again, Portland is a playoff team. And in my opinion, they should have been probably a top 5 team in the West, in my opinion. That's just how good Portland is. But again, they got off to that slow start and they never really were able to recapture it until the bubble. They deserve to be in the playoffs. Out of all of the teams, I understand how great Phoenix was. They went 8-0 bubble. And again, Memphis was phenomenal. And I'll talk about John Morant as well. He was absolutely incredible how good John Morant was. Reminded me of a more efficient Russell Westbrook almost. I think he might be a better shooter. He went 3 of 3 from 3 in the second half of the game after starting 0 of 3. Again, he had 35 points. But I still, and all of those teams that were below Memphis, San Antonio, Phoenix, Portland, I think Portland was the best team. And I think everybody knew that just from a veteran standpoint, just from a superstar standpoint. None of those teams, again, San Antonio, New Orleans, have that 100% superstar player, while the Portland Trailblazers 100% have a top 10 player in the NBA, in my opinion, in Damian Lillard, and maybe the clutchest player in the NBA, in Damian Lillard. So again, there's not going to be a lot of moments for this, where this Lakers defense, specifically on the perimeter, is going to be able to relax, is going to be able to be like, oh, okay, Dame Lillard, CJ McCollum, they're not on the floor right now, so we can we can survive going against guys like Gary Trent, things like that. No. CJ McCollum and Damian Lillard, at least one of them, if not both of them, will be on the floor. I mean, both of them will be on the floor majority of the game, but there's not going to be a lot of long stretches where both of them are off the floor again, unless it's a blowout or something like that. So I really do believe for that matchup, Portland will be able to exploit the Los Angeles Lakers, and that's what's going to give the Lakers the most troubles. Damian Lillard and CJ McCollum are going to have outstanding series. Again, I expect Dame to average a minimum of 30 for this series, and CJ probably to average at least 25 if we're being real, and then guys like Gary Trent, Carmelo, things like that. Now, I'm pretty much been talking like this, like, oh my god, the Portland Trailblazers are going to run away with this. No, that's not the case, because there are weaknesses in Portland's game, a reason why they're only the 8th seed, a reason why that if, this play-in tournament wasn't a thing, they wouldn't have made the playoffs, if this bubble wasn't a thing, if the season was quote-unquote normal, right? They wouldn't have made the playoffs. They are not good defensively when it comes to their bigs. They have two big-name big men, Yusuf Nurkic and Hassan Whiteside as well. Zach Collins gets a lot of minutes occasionally, and Carmelo Anthony. Those are the forwards and the centers, or the 4s and the 5s that play the most minutes. Hassan Whiteside is kind of falling out of the rotation. Again, tonight he had 4 rebounds, 4 points. He had 4 in only 14 minutes. He had a terrible plus-minus. Carmelo Anthony and Yusuf Nurkic have been incredible, specifically from an offensive standpoint. And I have to hand it to Carmelo Anthony. He might be going through the best defensive stretch of his career. I would have to look back at some of those early Nugget days, or maybe even early Knick days. But again, he's playing phenomenal defense, despite the fact of that. And I don't think Yusuf Nurkic is a great defender when it comes to a big man. Again, the Memphis Grizzlies kind of exploited Nurkic when it came to the defensive end. Again, his matchup was obviously Jonas Valanciunas, who is a good center, not a great center. I think he's a high-level starting center. He had 22 and 17. So if if Valanciunas is getting 22 and 17 on Yusuf Nurkic, what is Anthony Davis going to get? Anthony Davis is going to get into the 30s, and he's going to have a ton of boards, things like that. That does matter, in my opinion. That matters a lot. And even if Carmelo Anthony, he doesn't have the length or even the size or really the athleticism anymore to guy a guy like Anthony Davis, if they wanted to put maybe JaVale McGee on Yusuf Nurkic. But don't get me wrong, Yusuf Nurkic is a great player. Whatever he takes defensively, he will give back a lot of it offensively. So again, Yusuf Nurkic gave up 22 points tonight against Valanciunas, but he also put in 22 points himself, and he's a plus rebounder. It's just on the defensive end, he's not going to be able to keep up with Anthony Davis, in my opinion. And of course, the LeBron James factor as well. Who's really going to be guarding LeBron James? Again, the Portland Trailblazers. Again, their starting 3 right now is Gary Trent Jr. I doubt he'll be getting that assignment. I expect it to be Carmelo Anthony, and they'll see a lot of early Zach Collins minutes probably when it comes to guarding Anthony Davis and JaVale McGee. But again, LeBron James is going to own Gary Trent Jr. or Carmelo. Again, it's really fun to see Carmelo Anthony and LeBron James. They've had maybe one of the most underrated storylines when it comes to each other. Of course, when we think of LeBron James, he's always been tied into Michael Jordan, Dwayne Wade, the Heatles, everything like that. Kawhi and Kevin Durant are his main rivalries. But when you think about it with Carmelo, again, go back to high school when Carmelo was at Oak Bluffs. They played each other, or Oak Hills, whatever it was. They played each other in high school. They were I think everyone considered them the first and second best player coming out of their draft, right? They had early battles against Cavs Nuggets, and then of course Heat Knicks, and then Cavs Thunder when that was a thing, and even Cavs Rockets. And then it was like almost a little bit of, now we're at Los Angeles and Portland. It's like, so this is just another chapter in the Melo versus LeBron, storyline. I think it'll be a fun matchup to see. And I think Carmelo will give LeBron some buckets. Again, Carmelo Anthony has been playing fantastic basketball of like 21 points tonight on 38 minutes. It's a lot of minutes for Carmelo Anthony to play. And he's been one of the most clutch players on this Portland Trailblazers team. The entire Portland Trailblazer team is clutch. CJ McCollum had a clutch 3 tonight. You already know Damian Lillard is maybe the clutchest player in the entire league. Gary Trent Jr. hit a really, really, really big 3 for Portland tonight. And of course, Carmelo Anthony is the one who hit the dagger against Memphis tonight. So again, a lot of clutch shooters. If this game is close, which I expect a lot of these games, again, I think this series overall is going to be close. If it is going to be close like this, who do you trust at the end of the game? Of course, you have LeBron James and Anthony Davis. Anthony Davis, who doesn't have the greatest fourth quarter, percentage or clutchness. You could argue some people think AD isn't clutch or he isn't as good as the fourth quarter as he is in the first 3 quarters. That lack of dog. I've talked about that. But again, LeBron James is clutch and he will get those buckets. But again, you have 4 guys on that Portland Trailblazer offense that I consider to be clutch players. Damian Lillard, the clutchest in the league. Gary Trent Jr. hits clutch 3s all the time. Carmelo Anthony and CJ McCollum. All of those guys can hit clutch, especially 3-pointers. Again, that's the thing. the Lakers are never going to be able to really pull away in this series because the Lakers, again, get a lot of points from the 2-point area. LeBron is a better player in the paint and driving than he is from outside. So is Anthony Davis, and so is a lot of guys on these Los Angeles Lakers teams. It is the opposite for the Portland Trailblazers. Melo would rather shoot than go to the rim probably at this stage in his career. CJ, Dane, and Gary Trent Jr., all of them as well. Only Nurkic is the exception to that. So again, I really do believe this series is going to be close. Again, if I had to predict, I think it's a 7-game series and a close Laker victory in 7 games. And this will hurt the Lakers' chance. Because again, the Lakers, what LeBron really wants to do here is just steamroll through the first 2 rounds, get to the Western Conference Finals against the Clippers, rested, healthy, feeling good, and go to war with them. That would be a long series. But again, I think the Portland Trailblazers aren't going to be able to do that, man. Again, I've talked about this before. The Los Angeles Lakers are playing with fire. I think they are 4-6 in their last 10 games. I'll double check that right now. I believe they're 4-6 since they're 4-6 in their last 10 games. While the Portland Trailblazers are 7-3, 8-3 after tonight. That matters. Again, the Los Angeles Lakers are playing with fire. Everyone's saying, oh, they can turn it off and turn it on. There's no guarantee of that. I think some players can do that. I would believe you if you said Anthony Davis and LeBron James can turn it off and on. But guys like Kuzma, guys like McGee, KCP, Dion Waiters, J.R. Smith, can they turn it off and on? Do they even turn it off? Is it just how they are? Those are big, big questions. And again, Portland's coming in and playing the best basketball of their entire season. And Damian Lillard's going one through the best stretches of his entire career. They're playing with fire. Again, I don't want to predict that Portland's going to win this series. Some people have said that, Skip Bayless. But again, I think it's a close 7-game series. I think the Lakers get it done, but it will not. The issue for the Lakers is not just barely beating the Portland Trailblazers in this series, which is I think what will happen. It'll be the fatigue later on the playoffs that will be a big deal as well. All right, we're going to take a quick break. On the other side of this short break, we'll be talking about the Chicago Bulls and the Chicago Bulls and the New Orleans Pelicans. And maybe even a little bit of the Brooklyn Nets as they look for their new head coaches. What is the future of the Pelicans and the Bulls? What can we expect from those teams? Mostly the Pelicans. I'll be talking about all that in the next segment right after this short break.
Are you looking for the very best NFL and college football podcast? Then check out the GSMC Football Podcast. Get the latest football news both on and off the field. From the NFL Draft to trades to the rumor mill to the NFL Combines. They got you covered. That's GSMCpodcast.com/football-podcast. Get updates on college rivalries, game day insights, and much, much more. It's football talk the way you want it. This show eats, sleeps, and breathes football. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
All right, and we are back here at the GSMC Sports Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. Again, I am Alex Masford. Thank you so much for tuning into this episode and continuing to listen to the show. We really do appreciate it. I just finished talking about Damian Lillard and LeBron James and how their first round series is going to be absolutely incredible. But over the past 48 hours, the biggest news in the NBA wasn't even the fact that Portland is the team that advanced out of the play-in round to face the Los Angeles Lakers. There were 2 major coach firings that happened today in the NBA world. Obviously, the big one that happened a little bit longer ago was when Jim Boyln, the head coach of the Chicago Bulls, was fired and he was not brought back as the Bulls head coach. And this one was a little bit more obvious. However, there were some reports that they were leaning towards keeping him, doing the struggle because of the struggles to find maybe a new candidate during the COVID pandemic. But again, it was obvious that Jim Boyln maybe was the easiest person to fire, if that made any sense. Again, he had a terrible relationship with a lot of players, specifically the star player of the Chicago Bulls, Zach LaVine, who I thought if Jim Boyln stuck around would want to demand a trade. Maybe that still is the case, but I'll get into that in a little bit. But also Alvin Gentry, who was the head coach of the Pelicans, was not brought back as the head coach of the Pelicans. And that was a little bit of a surprise to some people because, again, it was the first year of the new Zion Williamson era, and they did make it to the bubble. Again, they had a very poor showing in the bubble, so I'll talk about both of those teams. I mean, if we have time, we'll get to the Brooklyn Nets as well, who have their eye on an insane head coaching hire, which I don't think it'll work out, but it is something interesting to talk about. But anyway, let's start off with the Chicago Bulls here, because I'll start off with them because they fired their coach first. What would I do if I were the Chicago Bulls? Of course, they have a new general manager now who came over from the Denver Nuggets, if I believe. I don't know if he was, I don't think he was their assistant GM, though. I think he was their actual general manager, or at least, CEO of basketball operations. He's coming over now. That is an interesting fit now. So let's assume here for a second that they're going to maybe try to mold the Chicago Bulls into something of what the Denver Nuggets have done. Now, what have the Denver Nuggets done consistently well over the past couple of years, which has made them a top 3 seed in the Western Conference, and I think one of the most dangerous and deadliest teams going forward in the NBA. And that's draft well. Now, the Denver Nuggets have never been some sort of hot spot for free agents. The biggest free agent that they've signed recently is Paul Millsap. But again, they have drafted phenomenally well. Guys like Jamal Murray. Again, not these top draft picks. Jamal Murray, I believe, was maybe a lottery pick. Then you talk about Jokic, who was a second-round pick. Michael Porter Jr., who I believe was either just inside or just outside the lottery. And then Bol Bol as well was a second-round pick. Those are the core 4 players right now for the Denver Nuggets, who look to be maybe having one of the brightest futures in the league, again, all through the draft. So this is where I think the Chicago Bulls are going to take that route. Again, Chicago is definitely a bigger market than Denver, 100%, definitely a bigger hotspot for free agents. I just don't know how successful they will be through free agency, and I don't even know if that's the number one way that this new regime here in, Chicago, just the fact that it's interesting because, again, there's no way to certainly tell exactly how, the new GM in Chicago wants to build this team, especially after he finds a new head coach. But what I do know is that he has a fantastic experience with drafting well. So I expect them to want to build through the draft, maybe even more than free agents. Now, if the right free agent comes to mind, I could see it. But what I don't see the Chicago Bulls doing over the next future is packaging a lot of picks away for players who aren't superstars. A lot of teams will throw in second-round picks, even late first-round picks for some role players or some future assets or cash or whatever. I don't think that's what's going to happen with the Chicago Bulls. Again, they're going to want as many draft picks as possible because, again, they have a general manager who has traditionally drafted very well, and it wouldn't surprise me at all if he brings a lot of scouts from the Denver Nuggets over. As for the head coaching hire, there are a lot of names being thrown out there right now. Again, guys like Tyronn Lue and Jason Kidd, who we'll talk about with the Pelicans. Mark Jackson as well, who's a TV analyst, and he was the head coach of the Golden State Warriors for a long time. He is who I thought would get the Knicks job. And there's an underrated candidate, and this is who I personally believe the Chicago Bulls should and will hire. That's Kenny Atkinson. Now, Kenny Atkinson is now the former head coach of the Brooklyn Nets. Again, he coached the Brooklyn Nets all through their very long process rebuild. He was I think he was hired right after the coach who coached the whole Paul Pierce and Kevin Garnett teams got relieved of his duties. I think that's when Kenny Atkinson stepped in. And he really coached up these Brooklyn Nets teams to being one of the most fun, gritty, tough, young developmental teams in the NBA. If you remember with guys like D'Angelo Russell, Spencer Dinwiddie, Karis LeVert, guys who are still on the Brooklyn Nets now, but that was their whole identity, specifically those D'Lo years when the Nets were making the playoffs, pushing teams hard, being one of the better teams in the NBA. Without having that true number one superstar, again, D'Angelo Russell was their best player. Once you added in some superstar guys with superstar personalities, specifically Kyrie Irving, Kevin Durant, I guess they didn't have the greatest relationship. And Kenny Atkinson, obviously, the Brooklyn Nets ownership paired with their 2 star players who are both probably Kevin Durant, I think when healthy, is a minimum top 5 player in the NBA, if not top 3, if not the second best. And I think you could argue that Kyrie Irving's a top 15 player. So the management sides with them, and Kenny Atkinson is relieved of his duties, right? And he hasn't found a job since. That was earlier this season. That was a little bit before the hiatus started. He would be the perfect hire for the Chicago Bulls, in my opinion, because I think Kenny Atkinson is a really good coach. I think he's it's tough. Again, depending what you want, right? The head coach is out there, right? Kenny Atkinson, you have to take a look at their past resume. Jason Kidd is a big option. And I think the Pelicans should go after him, and I will talk about him. But he's had 2 previous stints as a head coach, both with Milwaukee and Brooklyn. And in both cases, when they left, they got better. Oh, yeah, Kenny Atkinson was the head coach hired for Brooklyn after Jason Kidd got fired and moved to Milwaukee or something like that. Again, not that he isn't a bad head coach per se, but Kenny Atkinson had consistent success with Brooklyn, and they got better each and every year. And not a lot of people agreed with the firing of him. Besides, they didn't have they aren't. Kenny Atkinson reminds me a lot of Bill Belichick. Not as a coaching level, he's not the best coach in the NBA like Bill Belichick's the best coach in the NFL. But from a personality standpoint, no nonsense. It's about the team, not about I. Doesn't really believe in superstars, right? Gritty, defensive sort of thing, and that doesn't really fit Kyrie Irving and Kevin Durant anymore, right? But it does fit Chicago. It fits the city. It fits the fan base. It fits the history. It fits the current players there. They are a very young team. A lot of people who have very high potential. A guy like Lauri Markkanen strikes to me as a guy who just needs to be in the right coach, and then he will explode and be a really good, capable player. A guy like Kobe White as well, who was already showing a ton of flashes pre-hiatus in the NBA. He was doing absolutely phenomenal for the Chicago Bulls. And Zach LaVine is already an all-star caliber player, in my opinion. Who knows if he will get any better than he is now. But even if he doesn't, if this is his, flat line and this is exactly what he'll be playing like consistently, then you have at least a 1B player, in my opinion, and a solid number 2 option to a potential superstar. Again, the Bulls are going to have another high draft pick this year as well. And again, Chicago is a big market. But this team, for Chicago in particular, would make a lot of sense to try to develop the young talent they already have, as well as maybe adding a lot of other players through the draft as well. This does not scream to me as a lot of free agent signings, a lot of big trades. Again, this to me seems like a team that wants to have a lot of assets with them, a lot of young talent, and wants to develop their young talent. And a guy like Kenny Atkinson has been able to do that before with, again, the Brooklyn Nets. Karis LeVert took huge jumps. D'Angelo Russell pretty much revived his career and became an incredible player for Brooklyn as well. And again, if Kyrie Irving wasn't going to sign there, they were going to keep D'Angelo Russell. Guys like Jared Allen as well. Now think what he can do with some other really, really high caliber potential players, again, like Lauri Markkanen and Kobe White and whoever they draft in a top pick again this year. That makes a lot of sense to me. Kenny Atkinson would be the perfect hire for the Chicago Bulls, in my opinion. Again, tough, gritty guy. Would make a lot of sense for the fan base. Again, as a developmental coach, to pair up with a general manager who was all about, getting the right pieces in place through the draft, finding hidden gems in the second round, late lottery picks would make a lot of sense for the Chicago Bulls. Again, that's where I think the Bulls should go. As for the New Orleans Pelicans, this is how I would fix the New Orleans Pelicans essentially. I like the GM, David Griffin. He was the general manager for LeBron and the Cavs. He's played with a similar type. He's now, Zion Williamson is a similar type player to LeBron James, and as in play style, specifically early in their careers as well. And Zion will develop a jump shot eventually. It's no secret what Zion Williamson needs besides the whole health thing is a little bit over-exaggerated for me. There's been people saying he's in a race against his own body. He's gonna, crap out or whatever after a couple of years. Does Zion Williamson need to lose weight? Probably at least a little bit, but again, we're putting a barrier, we're putting around a cage around Zion Williamson because of his body type. When in all reality, we should just say we don't know, because we don't know. He is the first NBA body type to be this big and also be this athletic and be this jumpy, be this exciting, right? We've never seen something like this before. I don't understand why a lot of people act like they know how his body works or how he needs to lose weight or he needs to do this or play differently. Zion Williamson's been playing in his body like this his entire career. And again, there have been some injury concerns with that meniscus and everything like that, but it's never been something completely terrible. He hasn't torn an ACL consistently. He hasn't had consistent feet problems, things like that. All he's done is be the best player on the New Orleans Pelicans this entire season. And again, he was on a minutes restriction. Does he need better conditioning? You could argue yes, but again, the guy who was saying that he needed better conditioning and needed to get in better shape and was holding him back minutes just got fired, Alvin Gentry. So you got to take everything with a little bit of a grain of salt here. Again, it's interesting. Don't get me wrong. But what I would do if I were the New Orleans Pelicans, again, I like the GM David Griffin, is I would hire Jason Kidd. Jason Kidd is a guy who might be the best developmental head coach out there. I ranted and raved about Kenny Atkinson, and don't get me wrong, he's a phenomenal developmental head coach and would be perfect for the city of Chicago and the Chicago Bulls. But there's one thing in particular, this is almost an NFL type thing, right? The NFL is a copycat league, correct? Yeah, right? You see somebody as a really good quarterback coach for Patrick Mahomes, or a really good offensive coordinator for Patrick Mahomes. Oh, we need him to be our head coach, and we need to draft a quarterback similar to Patrick Mahomes, right? It's a copycat league. Zion Williamson and really probably, David Griffin and ownership of the New Orleans Pelicans has seen LeBron James and specifically Giannis Antetokounmpo. and they've seen how good Giannis can be as a pure paint player and not really much of a shooter, just a big, physical, athletic guy, in shape, things like that. Who, if you ask Giannis himself, gets the most credit for developing Giannis into the player he is besides Giannis himself? That's Jason Kidd, who was the head coach of the Milwaukee Bucks. And you remember, Giannis was heartbroken when they got rid of him. And again, I really thought Jason Kidd was going to get a chance like that because, again, it's a copycat league, and you see the development that Jason Kidd was able to do with Giannis Antetokounmpo, and you just hope and pray that he can do that with one of your players. If he can do that with anybody in Zion Williamson, he's got the body type, he's got the play style, he's got the physical stature, and again, David Griffin has been a GM for a player like this before in LeBron James. What I would do if I were the Pelicans, I would hire Jason Kidd, and I would put him in charge of really developing Zion Williamson and making him their version of Giannis Antetokounmpo. And if I'm David Griffin, I'm signing Brandon Ingram to the extension and then trading him to the highest bidder for shooters and picks. And again, surround Zion Williamson with shooters, put shooters all around him, and have the lane completely, totally clear. If Zion Williamson wants to drive to the paint, he takes it himself for a layup or a dunk, perfect. If he wants to post up, again, the paint is completely clear for him to do that. And if he gets double teamed in the post, or he gets caught sort of driving for a layup, the drive and kick situation is something Zion's been doing probably since he was 12, since he was the biggest, most athletic guy on the court. He did it a ton at Duke. He was showing spurts of it here for the New Orleans Pelicans, but there's just a lot of players like Brandon Ingram and some of the other big men that they have that they kind of threw in there with him, and the paint would get clogged, and then Zion would kind of just stand there. Again, get a lot of ball movement going and let Zion Williamson be the player he was meant to be, which is a post-up player with the ball in his hands. Again, a paint dominator. Clear the lane. Stop clogging the lane for him. Clear the paint. Let Zion Williamson do whatever he wants in the paint. Surround him with shooters. That's what I would do. Again, what would a trade package for Brandon Ingram look like? I've seen a team as the Toronto Raptors that could be really interested in him. But again, a team that I just talked about, the Chicago Bulls, could be interested. A team like the New York Knicks. Get picks, get shooters, surround Zion Williamson with that, and have Jason Kidd take the wheels when it comes to Zion Williamson's development. Whatever he has to do, lose weight, get in conditioning, or maybe get bigger, whatever he has to do. Become your version of Giannis Antetokounmpo and be that transcendent player that we all know and love and most likely hope Zion Williamson can be. And that player he was, and not that he already isn't, he was showing that. He averaged 22 points a game for his rookie year, man. Absolutely crazy stuff. Can't wait to see what Zion Williamson does. Quickly, for the next few minutes or so before I transition to some NFL stuff. There was a report that came out earlier today, and it's going to be an underlining storyline for the entire NBA offseason. The San Antonio Spurs made the playoffs for, I believe, 22 or 23 years straight. Of course, Greg Popovich was the head coach of all those teams for all those years. The Brooklyn Nets are reportedly going hard to try to convince Greg Popovich to maybe stop coaching the San Antonio Spurs and come coach the Brooklyn Nets. Now, while that would be absolutely incredible for Brooklyn, and I think Brooklyn would be arguably, title favorites after what, hiring the greatest coach in maybe basketball history on top of the talent of Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving. If anybody can get Kyrie Irving to, be what he was or still is, depending on your opinion of him, it's Greg Popovich. Now, the report did also say that it's extremely unlikely due to Pop's history and connection with the San Antonio Spurs and their ownership group and the fan base and everything like that. But it is a situation worth monitoring for. Would Greg Popovich ever leave the San Antonio Spurs? If there was a year to do it, it would be now. The San Antonio Spurs seem to be stuck when it comes to taking that next step. They're not necessarily playoff contenders anymore. They're certainly not championship contenders. Is DeMar DeRozan capable of being the best player on a Western Conference playoff team? That is in doubt right now. LaMarcus Aldridge is getting older, and he will be a free agent soon, and he was almost put on the trade block for the trade deadline this season. Again, and if Greg Popovich left, it wouldn't completely tarnish his legacy. He's maybe the greatest basketball coach of all time, coached, one of the biggest dynasties in sports history, the San Antonio Spurs. And again, his legacy is cemented. There's nothing that's going to really waver that downwards, at least. But again, if he were to go coach a team that had one of these openings, it would be interesting. Now, out of all of the head coaching, potential, candidates that he would have, there's a couple options I could see him considering. Chicago, just the brand and the name, I don't think that would be up of Pop's greatest interest just because the makeup of the team right now. Brooklyn would make the most sense again because they're ready to win now, and then Pop could come to the East, something he's never done, and then again coach guys like Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving, who he's probably coached at Team USA. It would be really interesting to see that happen. The only other team I could really see Pop going for is if the Philadelphia job opened up. Maybe he would want to coach Ben Simmons, Joel Embiid, or one of the two, depending on if they split on the pair. Again, being the 76ers head coach, being in Philadelphia, the big market, everything like that. I could see that potentially happening, but in all honesty, I'm not that confident in that. I don't think Popovich would leave, but the only two teams that make sense, in my opinion, really just Brooklyn and maybe Philly, maybe Chicago, but Brooklyn would make sense. But again, that report did say it is unlikely. But again, just an interesting storyline to follow. All right, we're going to take another quick break. On the other side of the break, there was a very interesting quote that Brett Favre had to say about Aaron Rodgers on where he would like to potentially see Aaron finish off his career, and it is not in Green Bay. I'll be talking everything Aaron Rodgers and everything that quote right after this break.
Check out the show that's built on the MMA. From the UFC to extreme cage fighting, they got the fights covered. Check out the GSMC MMA podcast. Get the latest news on past or upcoming fights. Join us as we talk to and about some of the biggest names in the MMA, past, present, and future. When it's the fight game, there's just one show to check out. GSMCpodcast.com/MMA-podcast. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
All right, and we are back here at the GSMC Sports Podcast, again brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. Again, I am Alex Masford. Thank you so much for tuning into today's episode and to continuing to be listening to the show. We really do appreciate it. I just finished talking about this future of some teams that have recently gotten rid of their head coaches, the Brooklyn Nets, the Chicago Bulls, and the New Orleans Pelicans. I want to switch gears here to the National Football League, as there was a very, very interesting quote that came out today, or maybe even it might have been yesterday by the time you're listening to this, from Brett Favre. Now, Brett Favre obviously knows Aaron Rodgers very well and went through the exact same situation that Aaron Rodgers is going through with Aaron Rodgers. If you remember, Aaron Rodgers was supposed to be the number one overall pick his year in the draft. San Francisco decided not to take him, and the Green Bay Packers, who had Brett Favre for the longest amount of years, decided to draft his replacement in the first round. That was Aaron Rodgers. Again, they did not have the greatest relationship. Brett and Aaron, Aaron would obviously wanted to take his job and be the starter. Brett wanted to hang on to that. Eventually they went with Aaron Rodgers over Brett Favre once Brett got a lot older and he went to the Vikings. And this is what Brett had to say when what would you like to see Aaron Rodgers do? And Brett Favre would like to see Aaron Rodgers pull a Brett Favre, which was maybe start for a year while that person is the backup and then go to a team in the division. Now, unlike Brett, where he went to Minnesota, Brett suggested that potentially Aaron Rodgers, after the season, end his career, or at least make the next stop in his career as a Chicago Bear. That is extremely fascinating to me, because could you imagine, folks, can you imagine? Exactly what Brett Favre did to Aaron does to Jordan Love. And now I've talked about this at length. Now, a lot of people are hating on Jordan Love because, again, everyone's like, he's no Aaron Rodgers. He's no Aaron Rodgers, right? Everything like that. But again, if you remember, Packer fans, when you drafted Aaron Rodgers, what did you say? He's no Brett Favre. He's no Brett Favre. We can't get rid of Brett Favre. And now you have Jordan Love, and it's, we can't get rid of Aaron. Why would we get rid of Aaron? Jordan Love's no Aaron Rodgers, right? History repeats itself often, and what we're finding right now is that this is happening yet again, and it is not the dumbest move by the Packers organization. The Packers organization has been one of the most stable, consistent winning franchises in all of sports because, again, there are teams who drown themselves years after years in mediocrity and poor play, just looking for their guy, looking for their Brett Favre, looking for their Aaron Rodgers, potentially looking for their Jordan Love. There are teams like the Dolphins and the Browns who have had 15-plus quarterbacks since the year 2000, while the Packers have only had really two, Brett Favre and Aaron Rodgers, obviously some injuries in there and things like that. That is how you stay. That's how you stay winning in the NFL, with the quarterback of your future, always there, right? So again, I didn't hate the Jordan Love pick. A lot of people came out and said how terrible it was. I didn't hate it at all. I thought they've done this before. They did this with Aaron. They drafted Aaron to replace Brett Favre. Now, I had some issues with maybe the other picks that Green Bay had, But again, they have sent Aaron the message that this isn't your team anymore. You are not the future. We love to have you for as long as you're willing to be here, but eventually we're going to want to turn it over to the kid. And again, Jordan Love is a very similar type player to early on in his career Aaron Rodgers. Again, different backstory, different level of football. Again, he's coming from Utah State. Aaron's coming from Cal. Jordan Love was never considered to be maybe the best quarterback in this class. Aaron Rodgers, I think, was widely considered to be the best quarterback of his class, better than Alex Smith, and it was just sort of a leadership thing for the reason why they passed on him. But it's interesting, because how long are they going to want Jordan Love to sit on the bench for? And if there's a lot of interesting quotes that have come out this offseason, specifically from head coach of the Green Bay Packers, Matt LaFleur, and what he wanted in the offense going forward was a lot more risk-taking, a lot more big plays, and I think the type of system that Matt LaFleur would like to play is a lot of running of the ball, and then like a lot of play action plays. I could see that, and then just opening up the down part of the field. And Jordan Love is a risk taker, man. He threw a lot of picks in college, but again, he threw a lot of touchdowns, threw for a lot of yards, a lot of completions, a lot of balls downfield, and I think that's the way Matt LaFleur would like to go. Specifically, also after drafting a running back in the second round, A.J. Dillon out of Boston College, who's a big, physical, old school type running back to pair with Aaron Jones, who's a similar running back, but can do a little bit more speed-wise and coming out of the backfield, right? That's the type of way that Matt LaFleur would like to play. Now, Aaron would like to keep his record of highest QBR in NFL history, and that's why he throws the ball away a lot. Aaron Rodgers last year led the league in throwaways. Again, he doesn't want to get that percentage down, and not that Aaron's only playing for stats, but he has an NFL record. He'd like to keep it. That's just human nature. The Chicago Bears are a very, very interesting option. So how I believe this whole situation is going to go is I think Aaron Rodgers will obviously quarterback the Green Bay Packers this year, but again, there's going to be a lot of media questions about Jordan Love for both Aaron and Jordan to answer, and I do think Jordan Love is at least 1 year of fully on the bench away from being a starting quarterback in the National Football League. He has always been considered a project, and while there's a lot of other quarterbacks that came into the league as considered, quote-unquote projects, Patrick Mahomes, Josh Allen, Drew Lock recently as well, Jordan Love, I think, is even more of a project than some of those guys. I think him and Josh Allen, I think, are the two biggest projects that have been drafted recently, and obviously Josh Allen kind of got thrown into the fire. But Patrick Mahomes had Alex Smith to follow, and Jordan Love has, Aaron Rodgers to follow. But after this season, because I do think Green Bay is not going to be the 13-3 they were last year. They led the league in most wins by 7 points or less. That's not a sustainable winning formula. That's just a great year. I think they'll dip down. They'll still win their division. I think they'll probably be a 10-11 win team. And then I think, Jordan Love's going to have a very, very good, he's going to look good in practice, man. He can make all the throws going into the next offseason. And I think Aaron's also going to want out as well. I don't think he's ever wanted to be a Green Bay Packer. I shouldn't say it like that. I think he enjoys being a Green Bay Packer. But again, Aaron Rodgers wanted to get drafted by the San Francisco 49ers. He is a California kid. He's a big city guy. He's a big brand. He never wanted to be stuck in cold in Green Bay, Wisconsin. Now, he got drafted there and he gets paid to play there, so he deals with it, obviously. But when you really think about it, does Aaron Rodgers make sense to even be in Green Bay in the first place? Now let's get into a couple of teams that I think could be an interesting spot for him to go. Obviously, let's start off with what Brett Favre said as the Chicago Bears. This team would make maybe the most up there with the most sense for Aaron, winning and playoff-wise and also just legacy-wise. I'm sure he would want to play Jordan Love twice a year, Green Bay, Chicago, just like Brett wanted to play Aaron twice a year, so that would make a lot of sense. Chicago also has a phenomenal defense. I think they have a good head coach in Matt Nagy, and I think they're actually going to take a step up this year. I really do believe the Chicago Bears are going to compete for a playoff spot. Who knows how far they will actually get, but I do believe the Chicago Bears will be a good team, and I really do think that. And spoiler alert, that is the team I'm going to be doing the schedule breakdown of after this segment. Again, I really do believe the Chicago Bears will be an improvement this year, and I'll talk about that in my next segment. But there's just some factors, because because again, Aaron Rodgers is probably going to have to acquired via trade, and I don't know. It's interesting, right? Because will Aaron get bought out? No. Is he going to get cut? No. You're going to have to acquire him via trade. Is Chicago willing to deal with draft picks? They haven't had a lot of draft picks recently after the Khalil Mack trade. Again, you might be thinking to yourself, well, it's obvious, Aaron Rodgers, of course they're going to want to make the trade. But what if they have a successful season with Nick Foles? They're already paying him a lot of money, and again, I think they will compete for a playoff spot this year. It would be really interesting to see how good Nick Foles could potentially be in the Chicago system, again with Matt Nagy and everything like that. But again, would they be willing to give up all of those draft picks to get a guy like Aaron Rodgers? I would say it's worth it, but who knows? If they made the playoffs with Nick Foles, Matt Nagy might decide to pass. But what Chicago does have is that phenomenal defense, and I think they have a great offensive-minded head coach, and I think they have the market, again, to really handle Aaron Rodgers. And again, it would be great for Aaron's legacy if he could beat Green Bay after switching teams. Now, two other teams that I think make a lot of sense for Aaron Rodgers are the San Francisco 49ers. Actually, three teams. The LA Chargers, the San Francisco 49ers, and the LA Rams. All the California teams. Also the Las Vegas Raiders. So these four teams on the West Coast. Again, Aaron Rodgers is a West Coast guy. He is a cool cat. He is the cool kid. He has never been meant to be. He was never built to be the cold weather farm man in Wisconsin, and playing for the Green Bay Packers. Brett Favre was built to be like that. Aaron Rodgers wasn't. Again, he is a West Coast guy. Now, all of those teams currently have quarterbacks, right? In Las Vegas, it's Derek Carr, even though I think it's the worst kept secret in the NFL that John Gruden isn't sold on Derek Carr and would like to move off of him eventually. The Los Angeles Rams have Jared Goff, but he's been regressing ever since that Super Bowl year. Another poor year could prompt for his departure, specifically if Sean McVay's job starts being questioned, right? Then you go down to the Los Angeles Chargers, who have Justin Herbert. He's more of the future there, so they're a little bit unlikely. And San Francisco has Jimmy Garoppolo, and the only reason for them to really go after a quarterback would be if Jimmy G had a big regression year this year, which who knows if that would actually happen or not. I would argue he might take a slight dip, but I don't think it'll be enough for them to potentially move off of him. Again, this is why I believe Aaron Rodgers is going to go to the West Coast. I really do believe that the Los Angeles Rams or the Las Vegas Raiders are the teams that make the most sense. I love the Chicago fit as well. I love the San Francisco fit, and of course Aaron has always wanted to be a 49er. I just don't see it happening. I don't think Jimmy G takes enough of a dip. But the Vegas Raiders make a lot of sense. You can be the one as the face of the franchise of the new Las Vegas Raiders. They would be totally willing to move off of draft picks to get him. They have a lot of draft capital. John Gruden and Mike Mayock have been wheelers and dealers. They have a lot of good offensive weapons now, as well as Josh Jacobs, Henry Ruggs, Darren Waller. They're building up that defense and that offensive line. And again, I think it's the worst kept secret in the NFL that John Gruden is not in love with Derek Carr. He didn't pick Derek Carr to be the quarterback. Neither did Mike Mayock either. He was really close to almost drafting Kyler Murray if he would have been available for them. I think he had an interest in Tua Tagovailoa as well, and maybe even Justin Herbert. It never got to that far. Again, they obviously picked Henry Ruggs. Again, there will be a time and day where John Gruden wants a different quarterback, and so does Mike Mayock, and Aaron Rodgers would be the perfect fit there. And I think the Rams make a lot of sense as well, as Aaron is a California guy, and sending him back to the West Coast, where he's from, could make a lot of sense as well. But again, that's all in the Jared Goff factor as well. But if Jared Goff has a bad year, the Rams have been wheelers and dealers in the past, maybe they would give up some draft capital to get a guy like Aaron Rodgers. I think Las Vegas is the most likely option and give a lot of more sense as well, but Chicago makes sense as well. Okay, we're going to take a short break. On the other side of this break, I'll be breaking down the Chicago Bears schedule, where I think they will land in the playoffs this season if they make the playoffs. We'll get into everything Chicago Bears right after this break.
Are you looking for help for your fantasy football team? Check out the GSMC Fantasy Football Podcast. Get today's best advice on who to start, who to sit, even who you should draft. From sleeper picks to red hot lineups, they got it all covered for you. That's GSMCpodcast.com/fantasy-football-podcast. We'll cover traditional leagues, dynasty, PPR, even IDP leagues. When you need fantasy help, there's just one show to hit up. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
And we are back here at the GSMC Sports Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. Again, I am Alex Masford. Thank you so much for tuning in to today's show and sticking around all the way to the final segment. And I know I keep talking about how I'm going to do, break down the Buffalo Bills, and I will do that eventually, I promise. That Brett Favre quote about potentially the Chicago Bears just got me thinking about the Bears a lot, not even just with Aaron Rodgers potentially, but just overall. So I wanted to break down their schedule just for a little bit on the Bears. They have a new quarterback this year. I mean, not officially. Apparently there's going to be an open quarterback competition between Nick Foles, who I believe they gave a 4th or a 5th round pick to Jacksonville to come here, or to come to Chicago. Again, their head coach Matt Nagy has had some experience with Nick Foles, I believe, maybe in the Kansas City days, but really John DeFilippo, who is the offensive coordinator, I believe, was the quarterback coach with Philadelphia when Nick Foles won a Super Bowl. Now, that is a very interesting thing to talk about, because again, similar to how Phillip Rivers went to the Colts because of how good their offensive system is and how he's played in it before with Frank Wright, this is very similar to Nick Foles. They are going to do a pure system exactly which fits Nick Foles' biggest strength. And Nick Foles in the NFL is maybe the best, if not one of the best, RPO quarterbacks in the National Football League. That is how they won a Super Bowl in Philadelphia that year. They did pure run-pass options, let Nick Foles read the field. He's got a super high football IQ. He's not the greatest quarterback in the world. He's also not the worst. I think he's an above-average quarterback, and I think he can win a lot of games for a football team. Again, we saw it. He won the Super Bowl with the Philadelphia Eagles. What did it take? A good offensive system with good offensive weapons and a good offensive head coach and a stellar defense. Now, what, out of all the things that I just said, what does Chicago maybe not have? Maybe not the greatest receiver core, maybe not as good of a head coach, but I think they have a fantastic head coach in Matt Nagy, and I think they have good enough weapons for Nick Foles to work with. And again, the run-pass option system, letting Nick Foles read the field and pick apart the defense is what he is good at. They did not do that in Jacksonville. Jacksonville was very much throw the ball downfield, which Nick Foles likes to do as long as it's part of the RPO game. I think there'd be a lot of success here in Chicago. Again, I think they had a little bit of a downward spiral last year. I think that defense was kind of sick and tired of playing for an offense led by Mitch Trubisky that just wasn't getting anything done. Now this year with a Super Bowl winning quarterback in Nick Foles, I think they can make a big splash this year and win a lot of games. So let's right into it with their schedule here. Week 1, they play the Detroit Lions. I think this is a win. Again, I don't think the Lions are going to be very good. Yet again, I think this is Matt Patricia's last year as the Detroit Lions head coach. I understand that Matt Stafford's back, and I think Matt Stafford's maybe the most criminally underrated quarterback in the entire National Football League, in my opinion. But again, I really do believe that the Bears will get that Week 1 win against the Lions. They handled it pretty easily. I think that defense is too good, and I think Nick Foles will start off with a bang. So the Bears start off 1-0. Next up, they have the Giants Week 2, another relatively easy matchup for them. Again, it's going to be a new a new coach with a very young quarterback, Daniel Jones. Saquon Barkley will obviously be the headliner for that offense. That defense still is not good at all, and I think that offensive line is still rebuilding. I think the Giants have a bright future. I think Daniel Jones is better than a lot of people think. I don't know if Joe Judge can coach, though, and in just his second, game as an NFL head coach against the Chicago Bears team, that will be very, 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 very hard to see. Very hard to win. I think the Bears will start off 2-0 and beat the New York Giants. Next up is the Atlanta Falcons on the road here. Again, another winnable game here for the for the Bears. They have the defense to contain that high-powered offense of, Julio Jones, Calvin Ridley, now Todd Gurley, Matt Ryan. I think they will score a lot of points, but I think the defense, if they can keep it close, this Atlanta defense is not good, and Nick Foles in that RPO game could really pick it apart. I think the Bears start 3-0. Then they face the Indianapolis Colts. Again, this will be a close game, but it's in Chicago, not in the Dome. Phillip Rivers will perform well in the Dome. Outside of the Dome, who knows? Again, it will start to get cold by then in Chicago. It'll be October by that point. I think the Bears are going to start 4-0. Call me crazy. The Lions, Giants, Falcons, and Colts are all very winnable games for Nick Foles and this team. Again, with a roster that's pretty much all coming back from last year, just plug and play Nick Foles here, and they're not changing the offensive system at all. I think they will start off hot. I see a 4-0 start for the Chicago Bears and Nick Foles. Next up is the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. I think it's a primetime game. This will be a lot of fun to watch. Again, they will be coming in 4-0. We'll get Foles versus Brady again with something we haven't really seen since the Super Bowl. But I'm going to have to give this one to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. They are just a better overall football team. And Tom, I don't think will want to lose to Nick Foles a second time. So they start off 4-1. Next up is the Carolina Panthers. I think they will get this victory as well. So that's 5-1 start right here for the Chicago Bears. Really, really, really good stuff here. Then they go to travel against the Los Angeles Rams, which will be a tough game. It'll be close. It's in Los Angeles. I'm going to have to give this one to probably the Los Angeles Rams. However, it will be very, very close. It is a toss-up game. That is a toss-up game for them. If it was in Chicago, I'd say the Bears, but it's in Los Angeles, having to travel cross-country after already playing the Panthers on the road. Again, they will start 5-2 and they will be okay. Next up is probably the roughest part of their schedule, the Saints and then the Titans back-to-back. I think those are 2 losses for the Chicago Bears, putting them at 5-4. Again, still a good start for them, but 5-4 is how they start. Then you have the Minnesota Vikings game. This one is in Chicago, so I think they will win this game. It'll be a big, big division game for them. I think that they will get it done. I like Kirk Cousins. I think the Vikings are good. They'll probably make the playoffs, but in Chicago, these rivalry games, you never know. So I'm going to give this one to the Bears, making it I think it's 6 wins now for them on the season, 6-4. Then they have to travel to Green Bay. Again, Aaron Rodgers is still one of the best quarterbacks in the league. I don't think it's likely that they win that one, so they will drop to 6-5. Then they get to face the Lions again. I think they will take this one relatively easily, putting them at 7 wins on the season. And then you get to the final 4 games. So they are at 7 wins. They're about 7-6 going into the final 4 games against the Texans, Vikings, Jaguars, and Bears. Now they're definitely going to win the Jaguar game. So at a minimum, I think that the Chicago Bears are going to win 8 games. At a minimum, they win 8 games after a hot start. Their schedule gets a little bit rougher on the back end. So I think at a minimum, they win 8 games. Now, in the final 3 games of the season here, can they win one more out of the Vikings, Packers, and Texans series? Because again, with that extra playoff spot in the NFC and the AFC, I think 9 wins would get you into the playoffs. So I think, again, at a minimum, this team wins 7 to 8 games, but if they can sneak a win against the Vikings or the Packers the last week of the year, or even the Texans, or even earlier in the schedule against a team like the Rams, they could get to 9, potentially 10 wins, and that's where I see the Chicago Bears pushing for a playoff spot. I think Nick Foles will have a fantastic year. And I think Chicago will as well, which is why I'm a little skeptical about Aaron to Chicago, specifically if Nick Foles has such a great year for them. That is going to do it for this episode of the GSMC Sports Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. Again, thank you so much for listening. Make sure to subscribe to the podcast, again, on whatever app or website you're listening to this on. Follow us on all social media platforms, Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram, and leave us a 5-star review as well. We would really appreciate that. Again, I am Alex Masfer. Thank you so much for watching today's episode, and I will see you all in the next one.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network, from movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.